What's up, guys? In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to do GraphQL and Feathersjs authentication. So in the last video we set up how GraphQL can work with feathers, and this video we're going to actually add authentication on top of that. So if you didn't follow along and create the basically structure for using GraphQL, just make sure to git clone this repository. This has the code that we'll be working off of, and then make sure to cd into that and do npm install to install the packages for it. Okay, once you have that, you're ready to begin. And before we begin, I want to just kind of talk about how this is going to work. So there's kind of three components to it. Authentication, that is. The first is actually signing up, where someone will pass in a username, email, or we'll say email for now, email, password. They'll send it to the server, and then they'll create a user. And then once a user has been created, someone can log in. And again, you do an email, you get a password, and then it goes to the server, it authenticates, and if the auth is successful, great, it'll send a response back. If not, it'll send an error. And after that, you kind of want to keep the user logged in, but you don't want to store their password. So what will happen is a lot of times auth will send back a token, which you can then use to access basically that user's data, or only logged in user data you can get using this token. So what's going to happen when we use GraphQL is we're going to sign up passing in an email, a password, and just create a user. There's not really much that's going to be given back to us. And then when we log in, we're just going to authenticate, and then we're going to give back a token. Those are pretty simple, right? But then the next thing we have to talk about is how to approach creating like a service. So for this example that we're using, I'm going to be creating a service that is basically needs authentication. We won't put in this parentheses, but let's say I'm creating a secret burrito, and you can only create a secret burrito if you are a logged in user. And so how this is going to work is, what you would like to do is you'd first want to log in, right? You were given a token. Once you have this token, you then are able to create burritos because you are a logged in user. So you're going to send your token to the server, and you're also going to tell it you want to create a burrito. And then the burrito is going to take the token, it realizes you're authenticated, and you can use basically you can create burritos because you're logged in. We see you have a valid token, so it's going to authenticate and make sure the token's valid. If the authentication is good with the token, then what it's going to do is it's going to create the secret burrito. And so this is going to be one of the GraphQL things where we take the token, we authenticate it, and then we create the secret burrito, right? And basically we have to attach a user to this burrito object so we know which user created it. The last thing is, as a user, how do I see all the burritos that I've gotten? For this, what we're going to do is we're kind of going to do what's called a viewer model or architecture, where what you're going to do is we're going to call it a viewer, which what we're going to do is we're going to call a token. We're going to pass the token in to the server. So this assumes we're already logged in. We're going to pass a token into the server. The server is going to authenticate it. It's then going to get the user attached to it. And once it gets the user attached to it, it can get all the data that this user has. So it can then fetch all the secret, get all the secret burritos that user has created. And this is kind of how we're going to set up the GraphQL. We're going to create two new services, secret burrito and viewer, to handle things. The viewer service is basically just going to take a token and then return a user. And then once we have a user object, we can then fetch secret burritos. And then we're also going to set up a service that just basically is a service for the secret burritos. This is kind of just a high level overview of how it's going to work. Let's actually get into the code of how this works. So go ahead and go into source and go into services and then GraphQL. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the schema. Now we're just going to start off with doing the login and the sign up. So we're going to have to create a new type called a user, and all a user is something with an ID and a email. Later we'll add on basically properties that the user can have, like a secret burrito or something else. But for now, this is all it has. And we're going to also have to do another type, which is going to call authorized. And this is what we're going to pass back to the user if they successfully log in. We're going to give them a token that they can then use to create burritos or do other things once they're logged in. And then we're also going to give them just their user object back. Okay, now to do these, we're going to have to create some mutations. So go to the root mutation, and we're going to create two functions, sign up, and this is going to just take a username or an email, and then a password, and then out spits out a user. Now for a login, we're going to take an email string and a password string, and then we're going to pass back the token which is an authorized type. So this is the schema setup that allows us to sign up and log in. Let's go ahead and get out of here and go into the resolver. Now in the resolvers, we're going to add two more resolvers, or not two resolvers, two mutations that we just did to it. So the first one is sign up, which is very easy. We're going to pass in root args context, and then all we're going to do is we're going to return we're just going to create a user based on the user and password that they pass in, and to do that we're just going to have to get the user's service. So users app.service users. Okay, and then we're just going to return users.create, passing in args. And then the second thing, well actually for this case, this is all it needs. We don't need to be authenticated or anything to create a user. Okay, then login. Login is a little bit more complicated because, and we need to break this down into email and password. It's a little bit more complicated because to authenticate, what we actually need to do is make a post request to auth/local. And to do that, you've seen in the past, if you've watched some of my videos, on the client side, what we've done is use the Feathers client to authenticate, and we'll do the same thing here. So you just want to import the Feathers client. So import Feathers from Feathers client, import superagent from superagent. So this is two packages that we're going to have to install that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to, in the background, I'm going to open up another tab. Make sure you're in the same folder and do npm I, short for install, and we're going to save the Feathers client and superagent and just install that. So I'm going to hop back to the main code real quick. I'll let that run in the background. And alright, so we have this client, we just need to set it up. So const auth is equal to, and actually before we create the actual object, we're going to have to get the base URL, and this is the base URL for our server, and we can actually get this from the app. So app.get host, and then colon, we also need the port, app.get port. Alright, that looks good. This is just this should come out to localhost p localhost, or if we put this into production, whatever our URL is for the server. Okay, so then in our auth, we're going to create Feathers object, and then we're just going to configure it. We're going to do feathers.rest, passing in the base URL, and then we're going to be using superagent, and then configure hooks, feathers.hooks, and then .configure feathers.authentication. And then we don't need to pass anything for authentication. Okay, now back into our login down here. We're just going to return auth.authentication. Authentication. And then here, the type is local. Local just means you're going to be passing in an email and password instead of a token. So email, password. And this allows us to sign up and log in users now. So I want to test and make sure this works. To do this, I'm just going to start the server. So I'm going to open another tab and do npm start. And I'm going to just open up, go to localhost 3030/GraphQL. This brings up a little interpreter that we can then make queries with. So the first thing I want to do is do a mutation and create a new user. So we said sign up, and you can make a new user. I'm going to create email. I'll say test@test.com, and then the password is going to be test as well. Okay, and just run play, and you notice it ran successfully, it created a user, right? Awesome. Now let's try logging in. And we can get rid of this part because they'll be different. And we're using the same email, same password. And authentication, looks like I just misspelled something. Authenticate. Authenticate. Not authentication, it's authenticate, my fault. And then just restart the server. When that restarts, we can run this thing again, and we'll see if this successfully authenticates. We know it successfully authenticates if it gives us a token. So if we just run play, we get our token. Awesome. So that means our login and sign up is working. The next step is to actually create the two services I talked about, Secret Burrito and Viewer, and to actually create a service with a authenticated user. Now, before we get into that, I just want to show you, talk about the index of the GraphQL. You notice that we have const token provider, and then we pass in a context thing here, right? Well, if you were watching with the resolvers, you'll notice that we have this context object here, and we actually pass it into this crate. What this does is it takes the context here and passes it in here. So what you can actually do is you can pass in a token, which is what we're going to be doing, which was going to be the user's token, or that is associated with them logging in, the thing we just created right here. We're going to pass that in as a post request. It's going to be one of the parameters. And then what that's going to do is it's going to pass it to the function here, and we can use this context to then authenticate and to be able to create secret burritos, which you have to be logged in to do. So it's a way to check that they're logged in. And to actually pass this token in, we're going to be using Postman. You can do this through a client as well. I won't show that in this video. We're just going to use Postman for now. But as you can see, we're pointing at the server, localhost 3030, and we're looking at GraphQL, not GraphIQL. And we have a query. This is just the same thing I have here. It's just written in a string and it's flattened out. And you also notice I have a token here, and we can actually copy this one, paste it in here for later use. And so what's going to happen is this token right here is going to be passed to our GraphQL endpoint here, and this is then going to be passed to our resolvers that can then be used to create secret burritos. Now I just want to run this to show you that this works, and you'll notice we get another token. Okie dokie, so now let's go into making the services. So I'm just going to close this and close this, and I'm going to go into the root folder. You should see the package.json, and I'm just going to do feathers generate service. So the first thing we're going to be creating is that secret burrito. This is going to use a database. We're just use any DB for easy use. And yes, we want it authenticated. We only want to allow authenticated users to use this. All right, and we're going to create one more, our viewer service. Viewer, generic, authenticated, say no, and we'll exit. Okay, so go into services. First thing we're going to touch is the burrito service. So we're going to go into secret burrito and then index. We're going to kill this. Should be, is it not in here? Oh, here it is. Kill this thing. We don't need to have pages that messes things up. And then also in the hooks, we just need to add something to the create hook. We want to associate users to burritos that are created, and so to do that, you just do auth.associate current user, and then you tell it what property name. So I'm going to call it owner ID. So what this does is it actually adds a property to every time I create a secret burrito object, it adds a owner ID property with the current user that created that burrito, so we can keep track of users that are creating it. Okay, so this is all done, and then also come back to the main services folder, so cd into services, and then open up index. Make sure that GraphQL is the last one, so move it down below secret burrito and viewer. Okay, and then go into viewer and then index. We're going to kill all of the service things. The only thing we want it to do is to have one thing, which is find, and we would like to pass in what the current user is. So all we're using this service for is to get the user. So it runs, we'll call find, and it will return us the current user. And also, it doesn't make sense for viewers. We'll just call this viewer. So get rid of the S at the end. Okay, and then we just need to actually populate the hook with a viewer, or sorry, not a viewer, a user. So to do that, you just want to go into hooks and then index, and then we need to create or get the auth library. So require and get feathers authentication dot hooks, and then when we do the find, we just want to verify that they are a user. That their token is valid, and that's a user that we have in the database. And then you want to give it the user data. Okay, so our viewer is set up. Now we just need to mess with our GraphQL schema. Oops, so cd GraphQL and open up our schema. So in our schema, we'll be creating some new types. So we'll create a new type called secret burrito, capital S, secret burrito, and we are going to give this an ID and also we'll say size, which is also a string. Now we want to show we have associated users with burritos, so all users, some of them might have 0 burritos, but some of them might have created burritos, and we want to know what users have created what burritos, so we can add a property to the user that gets their burritos that they have created. So secret burritos, secret burrito. So it returns an array of type secret burrito. Okay, and then in our root query, we want to add one called viewer, and all this does, viewer, is if that user is logged in, it returns the user object. And from the user object, they can get the burritos that they have created, which we'll be demonstrating in a moment. And then we just need to, we already set up, do we set up create? Nope, we need to set that up. The create secret burrito. So this is actually when we make it, and the only thing we need to do is pass in a size. So size, which is a string, and out pops out a secret burrito. Okay, so our schema's good. So then we just needed to play with our resolvers and get those set up. Okay, so the resolvers, we have two new services that we just made, so we're going to need to create those here. So secret burritos is equal to app.service secret burritos. Second is our viewer is equal to app.service viewer. And our viewer, the main thing for the service, why we have this, is to get data that needs authentication. It's just basically a roadblock. If you're not authenticated and you try to access viewer, it won't let you, but if you're authenticated, it'll let you get viewer, and then you can get all your other data from that object. So let's first start with create burrito, because that one's really easy. So create secret burrito root args context. Now remember how I told you that the token that we need is in this context object. So we're just going to say secret burritos.create, passing in the args and then the context. So the context here will have the token that allows us to create it, and you'll notice that because create taco, this is something we did in the last video, it does not have authentication, so even if you're not logged in, you can create tacos. But if you aren't logged in, you cannot create secret burritos. And we'll see that because context, the token, will be invalid or undefined when we try to create it, and it won't like it. So we'll see that in action. So we need to make sure to pass in the token, though, so it can verify that we are logged in. Okay, so that's super easy. The next thing is just the viewer. So we're just going to create a new query called viewer, and we're going to take root args context, and all we're going to do is we're going to call our viewer.find, and remember what this function does. All it does, and we need to pass in context. It takes this token right here that we pass in the context, and it gets the user object. Now once we get the user object, we also want to get the tacos that they have. And so to do that, we need to come up here to the outer layer of the object and create a user property. So this is going to be called if the user is if someone's trying to query the secret burritos of a user. They'll have the user will be passed in, so we'll have the ID, and we'll be using that because what we're going to do is we're going to turn secret burritos.find. And make sure that's not capital, and we're going to query the owner ID, and we want to equal to the user.id. So what that will do is it'll then fetch the user. Once it gets the user, it then uses that ID to then fetch the burritos. Okay, so this is all set up. I'm just going to cancel out of that, Control C, and then npm start to start the server back up. And then let's give this thing a shot. So the first thing I want to try is just as an unauthenticated user. I'm just going to refresh. Oh, let's see what happened. And just so I can see the error, I'm going to go back up and just run babel node on source. So there's an error. Oh, it looks like I just have a syntax error. This should be a semicolon at the end of secret burrito. Alright, now let's restart. Oops. So npm start, or you can do it manually. Alright, server started up. Oops. We'll come over here. And alright, cool. So the first thing, we're just going to try to do viewer. Now note we are not logged in. This should give us some kind of error, and you'll notice it says authentication token missing. That's perfect because we're not logged in. To be logged in, we need to either log in and get the token and then pass that in. So remember how I told you we got this token, we logged in, so we can run it again. We'll make a post, we'll get the token. So we have this token here, we'll copy that. We'll paste it in here. We now have the token. So this allows us to get a viewer. So we're not doing a mutation anymore. We're going to say viewer, and what viewer returns is a user. So a user has an ID, an email, and secret burritos. So we can copy, well, we won't copy, we'll just rewrite it. We can get the ID and the email of our user. If you run that, you'll notice test.test.com. So it was using this token, it was able to give us the ID or the email of the user that we have. Now, as this user, let's actually create some burritos. So since we have to be authenticated, we have to pass that token in. We can only do it from postman. So mutation, what we want to do, and actually I'm just going to write the whole thing over here. So mutation, I'm going to say, I believe it was create secret burrito, and then I just need to pass in the size that I want, and I'm going to have to escape the quotation marks, and let's say I want a large burrito, and then from the burrito I'd like to get the size and the ID. So send, and you'll notice it gave me back the burrito it created. Let's say I want to make a medium one as well, and then create a small one. So you'll notice as this test.test.com user, I just made 3 burritos under my user, and now we can then grab that. So I can say viewer, and then I can get my, this will return me the user object, which is test.test.com, and then from there I can get my burritos by calling secret burrito, and then I have to say what I want to get from the secret burrito, which is an ID and a email, or not an email, a size, and then close that off and hit send. Oops, secret burritos. And you'll notice what it returns back is all the burritos that we made. So it has the medium, large, and small. Now notice if we get, say, kill this U, we send, oh, invalid token. So this token is what's verifying that we actually are the user that we are. Now I thought this was really cool. Something that I really like is you can kind of nest these things. So for example, I can now log in as my user, so getting the email, and I was test@test.com, and then my password was test. What this will return is a user object, so just run that, or not a user object, a token, and then it also gives back the user. If you remember that. So if we go back to the schema real quick, open up that for you guys. It doesn't just return the token, it also returns the user. We just have to ask for the data field. So if I ask for data, it then returns me the user. Well, from there I can then get, say, the ID, I can get the email, and I can also get the secret burritos that this guy has. So I can then say, get the ID of that, and I can get the size. So just running this query, what I can do is I can log in to this user and get all the burritos associated with his account all at once. So look at all this data that we just grabbed. We have the token now for this logged in user, which we can then use for further requests, and we also got all the burritos that this guy created. So that's kind of how authentication works with GraphQL. This is just one way to do it, but basically allows you to log in, grab the data you want all in one from the user, and basically you store all the data that a user has under the user object. And that's important to do. It allows you to do this right here, which is pretty nifty. And just keep it authenticated. You have to log in first to be able to access this, or pass the token in as you saw. Now there's other ways to pass in the token. You can pass in, for example, I could make a field. I could call this login and pass in a token, and then the user would pass in, you know, whatever, right? That's another way to authenticate. We just did authentication one way, where we pass in the token as a parameter to our post request. And if you're using a client, for example, making a React front end, there's clients that allow you to do this quite easily. And if you're interested in seeing that, or with another framework, please let me know in the comments below. I'm going to be creating some more videos with GraphQL soon. I'm really enjoying using this, and I really like how powerful it is. This was one API call, and we got all this data all at once. We not only verified this login, but we were able to get all the data for that user, which is really powerful in one request. So I definitely want to be playing with this more and showing you guys how to use this in actual web applications. So right now this is just setting up the back end. In future videos I'll be showing you how to set this up in the front end so you can access this programmatically with your client of choice. So thank you guys for watching.